I finally got around to watching Luca Guadagnino's Queer. This is Luca's second film from 2024, the first being Challengers, which I absolutely loved. I'd say that movie is in contention with Sean Baker's Anora for my favorite film of the year. However, if you're expecting Queer to be more of the same experience Challengers is, then you should probably stop that, because this is totally a different ride. Queer really isn't conventional in any way. It's often very slow and meditative. There's a number of abstract sequences that don't make much literal sense and only operate on a metaphorical level. I'd say that the last half hour of this movie is basically weird dreamlike shit that is the opposite of traditional. I feel like I need to give some background to the inception of this movie because it is an adaptation of a story written by William S. Burroughs. I did not find this out until afterward. Why does it keep happening to me? But yeah, much like the film I watched right before this, it's based on a novella that's semi-autobiographical. Burroughs used the pen name William Lee, and that happens to be the name of our main character. It's a recounting of his actual time living in Mexico City under the influence of lots of drugs and alcohol, and his real infatuation with a younger man named Louis Marker. And from my understanding, that's where the story ends. But this is not where the movie ends. The rest of the context I'm giving you might be interwoven with spoilers, so if you don't want to hear those, skip to right here. From what I can tell, the first part of this film seemingly aligns closely with its source material, but then we go to South America. This section seems to be based on the Yahe letters, a series of letters published by Burroughs detailing his time wandering various countries in search of Yahe, a psychoactive that some say grants the user telepathic abilities. If you've seen the movie, you know that that's much of the second half. So it's safe to say that Queer isn't just meant to be a one-for-one, but actually a kind of broader portrayal of Burroughs' life. This is reinforced towards the end, during many of the surrealist and vague scenes that are actually references to Burroughs. We see Lee shoot Jean in the head. You see, this is actually a reference to an extremely pivotal moment in Burroughs' life. Like I said, he did live in Mexico City, but it was actually with his wife in a very unhappy marriage. It was full of rampant drug use and subsequent withdrawals, alcoholism, and Burroughs often being out seeking other men to have sex with. Apparently one night during a party with friends at home, they drunkenly joked about playing a game of William Tell, aka that one act of shooting an apple off somebody's head with an arrow. His wife put a glass on her head, Burroughs took out his gun acting like he was going to knock it off, and accidentally shot and killed her instead. Due to bribery, manipulation, and general corruption, he never was seriously punished, but he does credit this as being the moment he started to seriously start writing. For instance, much of Queer was written during his waiting period for trial. His intense feelings of guilt, self-hatred, and regret were the vehicle he used to accomplish many of his most celebrated works today. Okay, sorry for the history lesson, but it's important because I feel like the key to understanding this movie is a more, genetic criticism with the author as context. I didn't really think this movie was about guilt per se. It just seemed to be more about this guy and his inability to connect with others and really himself. I started to think that this would be some kind of journey about Lee eventually realizing that connecting with himself and finding a way to finally be comfortable with his reflection in the mirror is what's important, but I don't know if I got that gist in the end. It ends with an older version of himself getting into bed and still imagining Eugene laying with him, implying that he still hasn't let go of this fruitless, one-sided relationship. What I think this is mostly all about is control, or lack thereof. Maybe it's trying to point out that the idea of controlling another person's feelings and thoughts is just as hard as trying to control oneself and their identity. Towards the end, we see Lee look into this tiny model hotel at himself, almost like he's a doll or puppet being operated by some other force. This explains the extensive use of miniatures. At first, I kept thinking how shitty and fake everything looked environmentally, but then I really started to notice, oh, those cars look like miniatures, and that plane looks like a miniature. Basically, the entire time, everything looks very fake and inorganic. But once I saw this scene, it started to click with me how intentional this decision was. Our main characters don't seem to settle into their queerness and end up hating their lack of choice in the matter of sexuality. The symbol of the centipede for queerness acts as a way of showing that while they seem independent, they are still attached as one entity, all a part of the same whole, just like Lee says. In this way, the film challenges the concept of queerness as just another box or categorization society has created. The original root meaning of queerness was that you don't fit in, so it defeats the purpose to throw being queer into one group. There's a lot of echoes of sameness or mirrors in the film that support this idea. There's even the suggestion that Eugene is just an embodiment of younger Lee. They weirdly have a lot in common. I guess you might even be able to make the argument that Eugene isn't even a real person for a good part of this story. Just maybe an extension of Lee or hallucination, as he grapples with his identity. When you start looking at the world as some kind of dollhouse or a game where you're moving players or pieces around, it makes you into a shitty person. But unfortunately, we are all trapped as directors in our own stage play, with roles that need to be filled and people we wish we could be. Everybody is very sadly stuck with a desire to organize and align, which is dehumanizing and, dare I say, disembodying for all parties involved. The quote, "I'm not queer, I'm disembodied," is central to this theme of having little agency. I guess if you really just want a simple outlook on this whole thing, it's just about being stuck. Stuck in yourself, stuck in your situation, stuck in your life. This is all very thought-provoking and interesting to be toying around with, but what kind of kills it all is what makes it happen. William S. Burroughs. Look, I understand that he felt a lot of his life, identity, and general mental makeup were something he fought to control. We now know that addiction is often genetic, and it's a real mental disorder that can completely override your sense of personal means, but I don't know if I can put careless murder of an innocent person under that same line. Like, killing your wife? I don't know, man. That's definitely 100% your fault. You can blame the alcoholism or whatever else you might want to, but that is a conscious decision. And then the fallout of that? It seems like you were in pretty good control to me. If you really had no say over what was happening to you, you'd probably be in prison and not a famous writer. This won't entirely affect my final score. I just think that this element ruins my appreciation towards a character who is very much supposed to represent more than just what he is in the narrative. That's all I have to say, though. This review was a little less ordinary, but so is this movie. It's hard to imagine a film called Queer being something that goes with the status quo. Daniel Craig was excellent in this, maybe my favorite performance of his. I'm kinda sad he didn't get nominated at the Academy Awards. Really, everybody does an awesome job performance-wise. If you want a challenging art film and a trippy experience, I'd recommend this. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. It's closer to a 6 than an 8. Thank you.